Sometimes a piece of media is forever tied to the time in which it was released. When someone experiences something for the first time can have a great impact on how it's received, how it will live on in their memory. I played Another Code 2 Memories at the right time in my life, though back then I knew it under its North American title, Trace Memory. It was one of the first story-heavy games I ever played. It featured a main character who I really felt I could relate to. The cartoony platformer mascots, the young RPG protagonists in fantasy lands, the violent adults seen in games my friends' older brothers would play. None of them compared to Ashley Robbins, a 13-year-old girl who finds herself in an abandoned house on a mysterious island. She's the same age I was when I first booted it up. The story, while it does have supernatural and science fiction elements, stays pretty grounded. Trace Memory was also in the first round of games I got for my Nintendo DS. It featured loads of puzzles that used the newfangled device. The game makes the player consider the DS as an object that they're holding in their hands, an object that mirrors the one Ashley carries around throughout the story. Another Code 2 Memories has been a game that I remember fondly all these years later, and while I've since become a huge fan of games that have done similar things, no experience has really captured that place and time like the summer of 2006, sitting on the bed at my grandmother's house with my bright blue brick of a DS. In September of 2023, an announcement for a remake of Another Code 2 Memories, along with its sequel, was featured in a Nintendo Direct presentation. It released the following January. I had been meaning to revisit the abandoned house on the mysterious island anyway, to see if my memories of Trace Memory held up, so I purchased a copy for my Switch and eagerly ventured to that island once again. But this remake wasn't just any typical re-release. Sure, the game was now fully in 3D, there was voice acting, the story had some changes, but there was something else. Something wrong. I knew going in that some things were going to be different. The original game was so tied to the DS hardware, certain compromises would have to be made. But this new version of the game, now presented as the first half of Another Code Recollection, opts to do something else entirely. It opts to change everything. Changes and remakes happen all the time, and while it may be tempting to say that Recollection isn't great because it's different from a game that had a big impact on me, it goes deeper than that. As Ashley and I explored the creepy mansion, as we learned about her past and the history of the island, I had a sinking feeling about Another Code's past, or more accurately, how it is forever stuck in the past. Another Code Recollection shows a grim future, not only for itself, but for a whole generation of video game history. Another Code 2 Memories is a puzzle adventure game, cut from the same cloth as many point-and-click adventures before it. There's a lot of talking, a lot of searching rooms to find unusual keys for unusual locks, and some good old-fashioned puzzle solving. The gameplay not so subtly asks the player to imagine the possibilities of the DS. This game was released within a year of the DS being on the market, so it leans into this idea. Imagine the screen is a notebook and the stylus is a piece of charcoal. Imagine the screen is a rope and the stylus is a knife. Imagine the screen is a bottle and the stylus is a hammer. There are also bits where the player has to use the microphone to blow dust off an old picture or fog up a piece of glass. Something that kinesthetic was mind-blowing back in the early days of this strange Nintendo handheld. Even beyond that, Another Code 2 Memories features puzzles that sort of break the fourth wall. There's one where Ashley looks at a hinged picture frame with odd markings on it. The images appear on the top and bottom screens of the DS. What the player has to do is close the DS slightly so that the screens reflect on each other. Together, they reveal a solution to a puzzle. That's awesome! There's another where the player finds some rubber stamps. The stamp appears on the top screen and the paper appears on the bottom. What the player has to do is close the DS and open it again, like they're actually stamping the paper. This game serves as a showcase for what the DS can do, but it also plants seeds in the player's imagination. What else is the DS capable of? The first chapter sets up the story. Ashley Mizuki Robbins witnessed the murder of her mother on the night of her 3rd birthday. That was 11 years ago. She receives a strange 2-screen device from her estranged father, who she also thought was dead, and an invitation to come meet him on the foreboding Blood Edward Island. She and her Aunt Jessica take him up on his offer. But it isn't long before Aunt Jessica goes missing and the boat leaves Ashley stranded with no way of finding anyone else on the island. The player has 5 tasks to accomplish in this first chapter. First, they have to lower the drawbridge. Pretty simple, just walk up to the crank and turn it using the touchscreen. This teaches the player about interacting with objects and introduces the touchscreen. Second, they have to put the pieces of a wooden sign back together. This also uses the touchscreen, but is more of a puzzle. Third, they have to move a gravestone and meet D, the ghost of a kid who has lost his memories. Actually, moving the gravestone is really simple, just push it on the touchscreen. Fourth, they have to uncover a symbol to unlock a gate. This one's a little more involved. The player has to find rust on a machine, learn that the rust can't be scraped off by hand, ouch, find a metal brush, scrape the rust off with that brush to reveal a symbol, backtrack to the gate, and then input the symbol to unlock it. This sets up a pattern that 2 memories will follow for the rest of the game. Find a lock, find a key, use some aspect of the DS's functionality to actually do the unlocking, and reveal a piece of information that will be relevant somewhere else. The final task in this chapter is to find a way to get into the house. It uses the same pattern: lock, key, DS activity, in this case playing basketball with an iron sphere, and reward. All 5 of these activities involve using the touchscreen. Spin, move, slide, rub, flick. All are simple and intuitive. All are required to progress. So what happens when we take the touchscreen away? In the first chapter of Recollection, there are 4 obstacles to overcome. The first is fixing a bridge. Find a plank of wood and place it in a way where it won't fall into the river below. A decent replacement, I suppose. The broken sign has been replaced with a sneaky key lodged underneath a stool. Use the gyro sensor on the controller to dislodge it. Okay, that's something unique to the Switch, even if the obstacle looks and feels completely different now. Meeting D now involves finding chunks of damaged gravestones, putting them back where they belong, finding the symbols, and using them to unlock a gate. Alright, that's a pretty good replacement. But the bit at the old mine is missing entirely. Not only has the rust scraping been removed, but the gate symbol has been removed as well. And unlocking the door to the house, well, this little side building has been removed, so there's no object to fetch. Instead, the player has to figure out how to use these door knockers, which is just repeating a really simple pattern. This is an issue that plagues Another Code Recollection. Puzzles might look similar, but they function in completely different ways. Of the 5 original puzzles in this first chapter, 2 have been replaced with similar tasks. 1 has been improved, 1 has been made worse, and 1 has been removed entirely. None of the actual gameplay objectives from the original DS title resemble their Switch counterparts. That being said, the actual DS touchscreen stuff seems pretty milquetoast in retrospect. Something like turning a crank or scraping off rust relies on the novelty of this weird new 2-screen Game Boy thing. Remember, this game was released within the DS's first year on the market, before the smartphone revolution put touchscreens everywhere. But when Recollection was released in 2024, the novelty was gone. This game released during the last full year of the Switch's lifespan. The DS was but a distant memory for many. Moving a stone to the right on a touchscreen isn't a unique experience in a world with doom scrolling. So Recollection has a tough hill to climb. It has to remake a game built around novel interactions on a device that it does not run on. A device that has run its course and from which the general gaming populace has moved on. By my count, there are 23 puzzles in the original version of Another Code 2 Memories, although I played Trace Memory for this video because Ashley's more of a smartass. Of these 23, only 3 puzzles resemble their original form in Recollection. There's this one where the player has to overlay 2 pictures in order to get a code. The context is different though. In the original, this appears as soon as Ashley and Dee enter the mansion and is used to unlock the first door. In the remake, it's used to get sheet music for a piano much later, but the concept remains the same for both of them. There's also this one that involves combining 2 keys to form a new key. It appears at a different point in the game, but it's functionally still the same. And then there's this puzzle with the radio, where the player has to position the knobs in a certain way in order to turn it off. This is the only puzzle that retains both its mechanics and its context in the entire game. 12 of the 23 puzzles are new to Recollection, essentially replacing the old ones. Some of them are better in the remake. Instead of matching the pattern of these candles to make a door open, the player has to solve this scale puzzle that involves the phases of the moon and invisible ink. Cool stuff. But others are more lateral moves between versions. There's a bit in the DS game where the player has to find something to remove a rope holding a door closed. They have to find a knife in a kind of random place and then use the touchscreen to cut it. In the Switch version, to get behind an equivalent door, the player has to go to this new courtyard area and turn off the sprinklers to redirect water to clean a fountain. This reveals a key, which opens a door to a room with a key to another door. I'd say these 2 are about on par with each other. But others, I don't know, some of these puzzles have been changed for the worse. There's this one puzzle kind of early on where the player has to search the rooms in a hallway for a bunch of books. Along the way, Ashley and Dee learn about the family who used to live in the now abandoned house. Dee, a deceased member of the family, will have his memory jogged as he remembers his family from long ago. So when it comes time to put the books on the shelf, they have to put them in the right order, an order that spells out Henry Thomas, the names of the patriarch's two grandsons. In order to pass, the player has to put the letters in the right order, but it only makes sense if they've been paying attention to the story. But in the remake, the closest thing to that is this section where Ashley has to find silver plates in the various rooms of the house, and then put the plates on a shelf as they appear in a picture on the wall. And that's it. Search a room, repeat a pattern. There's this section too, where the player sees books in a certain order on a shelf in one corner of the room, and has to put them in the same order in another to open the way forward. Search a room, repeat a pattern. That puzzle, where the player has to stamp the paper by closing the DS, upon completing that puzzle, the player learns about an injury a member of Dee's family suffered. But that same information in the remake is conveyed like this. The player opens a box, removes its contents, then finds a doll that resembles that family member. The inventiveness seen in the original is gone, replaced not with anything noteworthy, but with the simplest game of hide and seek. In my opinion, of the 12 new puzzles, 3 have been improved, 4 are about the same, and 5 have been made worse. But most shocking of all, 8 of the puzzles have been removed and not been replaced with anything. The player makes similar progress by simply finding the object they need lying around. There's the aforementioned rusty machine puzzle. This is to get a code to open a gate, but in Recollection, the gate is opened after the second puzzle. There's no further need for a puzzle, and therefore nothing to do in the mine. The puzzle with the picture frame meets this fate too. While the puzzle itself couldn't translate in its original form, could there not have been a 3D model of the frame that the player, rotates? Rubbing charcoal on a paper to get a message left in the indentation? Yeah, that note's just sitting out in the open. This sliding block puzzle that gets you a medallion to get a key? That key is just in the safe. Piecing together a ripped up diary page? Well, it was never ripped to begin with. Breaking a bottle with a hammer to get a note inside? Who would put a note in a bottle? These are little things, but they add up over the course of the game. Rubbing charcoal might not have worked on a standard controller, but the diary page could, that block puzzle could. The player could have to look for a hammer to break the bottle, even if the actual breaking of the bottle isn't kinesthetic. So of the game's original 23 obstacles, 3 are the same, 3 have been improved, 4 have been altered to similar results, 5 have been made worse, and 8 have been removed with no replacement. That's over a third of the actual gameplay missing. There are of course some story and aesthetic changes as well. Certain scenes happen at different times, which I do honestly think improves the overall pacing. There's a new bit where Dee and Ashley get separated that has a pretty good payoff, even if it means Dee can go through walls now, but whatever. The house's layout is a lot more like an actual house instead of a bunch of hallways. The voice acting is nice, I guess. Some serious thought and effort went into updating this story. But again, those little story changes add up. There's a twist that happens midway through that's telegraphed in the original, but the remake practically just straight up tells the player what the twist is before it happens. While this version of the game features a girl named Ashley and a ghost boy named Dee exploring a house that used to belong to the Edward family, just about everything else feels different. Not only does Recollection, ironically, want the player to forget about the deep roots this game has to the DS, it wants the player to forget the original story and aesthetic as well. It wants to overwrite the original. So the question remains, why? Why does this game exist in the state that it does? Why was this branded and sold as a remake of Another Code 2 Memories when it might as well just have been a new entry in the series, or a new IP altogether? Was the idea to preserve the original? No, because why would there be so many gameplay changes? Was the idea to present the story to a new audience? No, because why would there be so many story changes? Was the idea for this to be a cash grab? No, because it's not like people are clamoring for Ashley and Dee to be in Smash Brothers. Is this to test the waters to see if people want a third game in the series, kind of like what Famicom Detective Club did? Maybe? I guess we'll see. CING, the original development studio, shuttered in 2010, so there's that to contend with. I don't know why this game exists. We can throw around words like reimagining or reinterpretation all we want to, but it doesn't hide the fact that this version featured in Recollection can never be a true remake of the DS game because, well, the original is a DS game. The original title looked to the future of gaming, showing what the future could hold for this experimental device. But it in no way was future-proofed for a future that left the DS behind. But Recollection stands apart for another reason. Even if the end result isn't especially faithful to the original vision, Another Code 2 Memories is one of only a handful of DS games to appear on a modern platform. One of the defining features of the Nintendo Wii was its ability to download retro titles to the system. The Virtual Console, as was called, allowed players to relive the old days or experience out-of-print classics for the first time. It was a big deal. While the retro collecting market and the emulation scene offered players these experiences, it was the first time Nintendo themselves offered their back catalog in a convenient, affordable way. It had all the consoles one would expect, but no handheld systems. Those would come in 2011 with the launch of the 3DS Virtual Console. There, users could download Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Gear titles, but no original DS games. Yeah, even though the 3DS was backward compatible with its predecessor, DS games weren't for sale on its eShop. But 4 years later, in 2015, that would change on the Wii U Virtual Console. For the first, and as of this writing, only time, users could purchase and download a select number of DS games to their Wii U. There were 31 games available. Stuff like Mario Kart DS, Zelda Phantom Hourglass, Star Fox Command, Kirby Canvas Curse, WarioWare Touched, a lot of the hits. I didn't download any of these games when the eShop was still up and running, so I can't test this firsthand, but from what I've read, this seems like a pretty solid way to play these games. It's not as clean of an experience as playing on original hardware, but it works. But as the Wii U died a slow death and the eShop closed its digital doors in 2023, those select few games faded into obscurity once again. The Virtual Console was replaced with a subscription service on the Switch, and it features a lot of the heavy hitters, but no DS. And now we're back to where we started. How could one play WarioWare Touched on the Switch? Or Kirby Canvas Curse? Or Phantom Hourglass? You can't. Of course, Another Code is far from the only puzzle adventure game on the DS. Professor Layton and the Curious Village scratches a similar itch, though it places a heavier emphasis on brain teasers than point-and-click adventure puzzles. The game presents a series of puzzles that the player has to solve with the touchscreen. Lots of dragging and dropping and drawing lines. It's a good time. And it successfully made it off the DS. This game, along with its two follow-ups, received ports for mobile devices, vertical displays with touchscreens. Since the game doesn't require the use of the directional pad or face buttons, it's a natural fit, and it seems to be doing pretty well for itself commercially. Konami published 3 widely celebrated Castlevania games for the DS. The gameplay takes place on one screen and the extra info appears on the other. This trilogy was re-released as a collection for every standard gaming device in the market in 2024, and it doesn't try to hide its two-screened roots. Touchscreen elements have been swapped for button presses. Since these games aren't too tied to the DS's quirks, they're able to translate over to a standard controller just fine, even if it looks a little clunky. The World Ends With You takes a different approach. In the remastered Final Remix version of this game, the two screens are consolidated to one. There are certain design quirks that show its DS roots, but it still functions without any knowledge of its original hardware. So these are 3 games that successfully made it off the DS and are, at least of right now, commercially available. And each of them adapt to their new hardware in completely different ways. Do we go full phone game? Do we try and fit multiple screens into one? Or do we only put one thing on the screen at a time? There's no one-size-fits-all answer, and that worries me. In 2023, the Video Game History Foundation published a widely circulated and rather alarming study about the dire state of game preservation. Only 13.27% of all games ever made are still available. That's wild. And that leftover 86.73% includes quite a few heavy hitters. In their study, the Video Game History Foundation targeted a few systems for a more detailed analysis. One of them was the Game Boy family of consoles, the original, the Color, and the Advance. When the Wii U and 3DS Virtual Consoles were alive and well, only 12.4% of all games released for those platforms were available. 12.4. When it shut down, that number shrank to a measly 5.9. Out of every 100 Game Boy games, only 6 live on today. And this is the Game Boy we're talking about. This is a single small screen with a directional pad, 2 face buttons, 2 shoulder buttons on the Advance, Start, and Select. This would be easy to replicate on any system. The study didn't explicitly look into DS games, but I'd imagine their numbers would be worse. When the Wii U offered DS games, they only offered 31. 31 out of an estimated 2,334. And those 31 were delisted in 2023. If these games were to live on in any official capacity, they would have to undergo serious changes. They would have to be ported to mobile devices without buttons. They would have to have certain touch controls removed. They would have to consolidate 2 screens into one. This requires work, time, money, things the industry isn't willing to spend on old games. I mean, why would they? Of course, there are less than official means to play these games. But even then, it's kind of a pain to play DS games on a standard display, at least if you ask me. A Game Boy Advance game? Sure, yeah, easy. But a DS game? In another code, Ashley's first task is to turn a crank. With a stylus, it works great. But with a mouse, I honestly had a little trouble getting it to register. I guess with a drawing tablet, it might be more intuitive. Closing the stamp was replaced with pressing a button, as was fogging the glass. And while flashcards exist for original hardware, will they always exist? Will Nintendo ever be successful in their crusade against emulation? Nintendo was doing some wild stuff in the 2000s. With the DS, the Wii, the 3DS, and the Wii U, they offered something different than the rest of the market. It was an experimental era, one that brought us some wonderful experiences. But those experiences are seemingly locked to that one place in time. While I enjoyed revisiting Blood Edward Island, while I enjoyed hanging out with Ashley and Dee again, it will never replace playing this game on my bright blue brick of a DS at my grandmother's house after everyone else had gone to sleep. What will happen to New Super Mario Bros.? What will happen to Nintendogs, or Elite Beat Agents, or Spirit Tracks? Will we ever see those games again? I didn't think we'd ever see another code again, and then we did. Kind of. We went back to Blood Edward Island. But it was different this time around. The mansion was different. Ashley was different. When I first played through Recollection, I hadn't touched the original since it had come out, yet the entire time I kept running into things. Wait, this isn't how I remember it. Was this always here? Wasn't there a statue in the foyer? Could Dee always phase through walls? I kind of felt like Dee bumping into something that would jog a distant memory. I remembered a baseball and a shoe. I remembered a zoetrope. I remembered a house that was long abandoned, a remnant of what it used to be. This new alien version of the island insists that it was always like this. As far as Nintendo is concerned, that old version of the game is long gone, replaced with this new, shiny 3D version, the only version that's available, the only version that will probably ever be available again. Why would you want to go back to the way it was before? There's a scene towards the end of another Code 2 Memories where Ashley and Dee discover why Ashley's father went missing all those years ago. He was working on a top secret project, a machine called Another, or Trace in the North American localization. It has the ability to replay people's memories, flawed as they may be, but it also has the ability to overwrite memories. What actually happened isn't remembered, but instead a fabrication of past events. What the machine operator wants to be remembered lives on, not the real, factual events, however painful they may be. Another keeps a record of the memories that have been overwritten. In theory, the original memory could be reinstated in someone's mind. In a pivotal scene in the original game, Ashley replays 2 of her father's memories, the way he currently remembers the night her mother died, and then what actually happened. They learn the truth of what transpired all those years ago, and then head to the island's cave to confront the story's antagonist. In Another Code Recollection, these scenes play out in a similar way, but there's an added scene before they leave the lab. To ensure that Another won't be used for nefarious purposes, in order to make sure the technology doesn't fall into the wrong hands, Ashley's father destroys Another. He seems almost eager to do so, as if rendering the whole device inoperable was the plan from the beginning, that this device he had dedicated his life to was only to be used this one time. This machine, this piece of hardware that he spent over a decade producing, a device his wife was killed over, a project so important he didn't see his daughter for 11 formative years of her life, gets thrown away in an instant. In the world of the DS version, one could still overwrite memories. One could go between 2 versions of events, no matter how painful or ethical. There would be a choice. 2 memories, 2 possibilities, 2 ways the past is remembered. But in the Switch version, that possibility is locked away. There's only one version of the past. And with another destroyed, there will only ever be one version of the events. The overwritten memories will stay overwritten. Of course, not all DS games rely as heavily on the system's quirks. In a companion video over on the IamADot Patreon, I take a look at many of the DS's best-selling and most iconic games, and try and figure out how they could ever be officially re-released, if at all. Joining the Patreon will get you access to over 20 exclusive videos like that one, as well as early ad-free episodes and behind-the-scenes goodies. Thanks for your support.